Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General, bringing you another Total War Warhammer 3 Legendary Lord lore video, and today we are looking at part 2 of the story of Nkari, titled Hunter and Prey. Now, if you haven't managed to catch part 1, do check the top right hand corner now, or you'll find a link to part 1 down in the description below. Obviously, I do recommend starting there, but without further ado, let's kick things off with part 2. For a time, Nkari drifted in his master's realm, regaining his strength. In a place that was not a place, in a time that lay outside of time, Nkari, the keeper of secrets, great among demons, felt the faint, irritating tug of a summoning spell. At first he ignored it. That a being should be foolish enough to draw his attention piqued his curiosity, but not very much. The realms of mortals were full of those who sought to barter their puny souls for the benefits they thought a demon could provide. Sometimes, when he bored, Nkari allowed himself to be called and then destroy those who sought to bend him to his will. Sometimes he granted their wishes and allowed them to destroy themselves, just so he could have the amusement of watching. There was something about the being making this summons, though, something that nagged at Nkari's vast store of memories and set them swirling. The way the scent of a half-remembered perfume makes an old rake remember the flesh pots of his youth. Yes, something familiar indeed. In this place that was not a place, in this time that was not a time, Nkari's mind worked in a different way than it had when he had been bound to the chronal flow of the mortal reality. He remembered many things simultaneously, sometimes as vividly as he was actually experiencing them, sometimes as if they were as remote as the birth of the universe. This summon triggered a fugue of memories and images. It reminded him of the mortal god Anarion and his descendants whom Nkari once tried so hard to kill. And there was about it a slight frightening taint of the flame of Asurion, the god thing that was numbered among Nkari's greatest enemies. Nkari was curious now, as he suspected he was intended to be. More virgin souls were offered up to him, slain in exactly the correct ritual manner to please him. It was nice that the proper rites were being observed. Languidly, he extended a tentacle of thought towards the gap in reality from which the summons had come. He forced a small portion of his mighty essence through the portal, and allowed it to take shape, according to the whims and expectations of the summoner. In that moment, mortal reality crashed in on him. He found himself trapped within a sorcerer's circle, in the dank underground depths beneath some cold northern castle. An armored figure as monstrous as any demon loomed before him. He was pleased. This was going to prove more interesting than he had anticipated. Slowly, a shape rose out of a pool of blood in front of an altar. It was a beautiful woman made from congealed red plasma. Snakes of hair swirling from her impossibly lovely head. She beckoned at Malekith in a lascivious, enticing way. Her hips swayed sinuously in a way that promised great pleasure. The Witch King was not even tempted. The wards of his armor neutralized the potent spells of intoxication. His destroyed olfactory nerves were insensitive to narcotic musk. Seeing that the strategy was not working, the demon changed tactics and shape, becoming something monstrous and four-armed and clawed. The blood congealed and hardened into a glistening carapace. The hands extended into talons and claws, the teeth, great tusks and fangs. This was more like its true shape, if a greater demon could said to have any such thing. Nkari, I name you and bind you, Malekith said. He spoke the ancient words of ritual. The demon resisted them. It was enormously strong, far more powerful than anything he had ever bound before. For a moment and a moment only, the possibility he might have encountered something too powerful for even his mighty will to dominate entered Malekith's mind. It's not so simple, little mortal, said the demon in a voice that was at once beautiful and terrifying. I am no mere demonling to be bound by a passing sorcerer. And I am no mere mage, Hellspawn. I am Anarion's heir, the Witch King, and you will do my bidding. The air between them crackled with the force of their conflict. Anarion, that is a name you should not have mentioned, Nkari said. You shall pay for your presumption. I know you hate him and all his descendants, but I have summoned you to offer you a chance for vengeance. The demon paused for a moment. Revenge I shall have, starting with you. That's not possible, Malekith said, not letting any of the strain he felt show in his voice. But I will let you drink the blood of those who humiliated you a century ago. I will let you have all of the others who claim descent from an Aryan. I can take my own vengeance, said Nkari. No, you cannot, said Malekith. I have wound you round with spells that prevent you from returning whence you came, and while this avatar is trapped here, you cannot bring another into this world. I can keep you here until the end of time, if I so desire, and vengeance will never be yours. The demon raged against the ever-tightening web of spells constraining it, but they held. Nkari was trapped within. His appearance changed again, becoming that of a seductive female elf. His voice was the very essence of reasonableness. State your terms, Nkari said. The demon considered the Witch King. As mortals went, he was impressive. His massive armored figure radiated power and not unjustified confidence. The spells he had woven were well constructed, a trap that it might take Nkari millennia to escape from. He had spent too much time in this pathetic place, bound into the vortex in mortal form. Ennui would press as heavily on him as any other residents of this time and space. He felt sure that he could free himself eventually, but it might be easier to appear to give the mortal what he wanted. He was also sure that in the long run, he would find a way to turn the tables on the arrogant fool. He always did. The Witch King laughed triumphantly. Laugh away, little mortal, Nkari thought to himself. I will have the last laugh. Extend your arm, said the Witch King, and Nkari complied. Perhaps his foe would be foolish enough to break the magic circle binding him. Bracelets and chains snapped into place. The most powerful binding spell Nkari had ever experienced snapped into place with them. Now, you are truly my servant, said Malekith, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. Nkari wanted to howl with rage, but the spell now binding him would not even allow him to do that. The year was 2301 by the Imperial calendar, some 200 years before the start of the Total War Warhammer timeline. The greater demon was now a prisoner of the Witch King. Nkari learnt much by Malekith's side of the mortal world and what had transpired in the century of his absence, including that the twins had gained great fame for their defeat of Nkari a century ago, and went by the names of Tyrion, who was the warrior, and Teclis, the mage. Malekith had been plotting an invasion of the Isle of Ulthuan, and Nkari was bound to his side now. He was there when he briefed his generals, when Morathi came to scold him for being so reckless that he thought he could control a being like Nkari. The demon and the sorceress exchanging what could have been a look of recognition. Eventually, Malekith's army was ready, and they set sail across the sea to the Isle of Ulthuan, on board a Black Ark. Malekith scarcely, if ever, allowed the demon to engage with him, but on the crossing he looked troubled. Dwelling on the past, the demon asked. That's my business, demon. For the moment, your business is my business, replied Nkari. It brandished its chains. You have made this very clear to me. This does not mean I have to discuss it with you. Do not make me sorry. I granted you permission to speak once more. Who else are you going to discuss it with, Witch King? Those idiots out there on their pathetic ships. I do not require to talk about it with anyone, least of all you, lackey. Then you are most unusual amongst your kind. Always they need to talk, to boast, to vaunt their pride. They are worse than humans in that way. You were thinking about life and death and the gods, said Nkari. That shows no great gift of understanding, retorted Malekith. It is what most elves would do, standing on these heights and looking at this view, while engaged in exercise on this vaster scale, said Nkari. It is what you mortals are like. I am no mortal, said Malekith. That remains to be proven, said the demon, allowing for some malice to creep back into his voice. By use, Malekith allowed the contempt to show on his face. The demon merely smiled. My time will come. If ever it does, you will find me ready. I did this once, came back the demon. The demon sounded thoughtful. Invaded Ulthuan, in the time before ever your father arose to oppose me. Malekith laughed. The sound was iron and cold and biting as a blade. It seems mortals are not the only ones compelled to talk, to boast, to reminisce. It is a weakness of being bound in this form, Ankari said ambivalently. Every day I become more like you. I live. I breathe. The realm of my birth becomes an ever fainter memory. But then, you understand that, don't you? We have some things in common, you and I. I very much doubt that. You are attempting what I once did. I suspect your result will be much the same. I will prevail. I do not seek to destroy the world and enslave my people. I am merely reclaiming what is mine by right of birth. Are you certain of that? Of what? That you are an Aryan son. Your mother was, to say the least, promiscuous. I lay with her myself many times, in many different forms, more than ever she is aware of. Malekith knew the demon was merely trying to goad him. He would not let it. The flame rejected you. It did not reject an Aryan. There was nothing Malekith could say to that, so he let it pass. He knew it was pointless debating these things with demons. Why do you think that was? Malekith exercised his will. The bracelets that bound the demon pulsed with energy. It stood frozen in place, unable to move or speak, until he willed it. He returned to contemplating his fleet. Soon, he thought, he would be home, and there would be a reckoning. With this demon, with the elves of Ulthuan, and with their gods. They soon arrived on an isolated shore of Ulthuan, and Malekith walked Ankari up to a waystone on the beach. This is why he'd been summoned and chained. Malekith knew a century earlier he'd used some means of moving his army around Ulthuan, and he wanted Ankari to replicate it to unlock Ulthuan's defenses. And so Ankari stood on the beach, in front of the waystone in the form of an armoured female parody of Malekith. The demon could tell the Drukiwa troops were nervous. He could tell they hated him. The demon nodded towards the Witch King. From here, I can do all you require. Then I suggest you proceed, Malekith said. The sooner you are done, the sooner you can have your vengeance on those you hate. Let it be as you say, Ankari said, a measure of irony showing in its tone. The demon set to work, weaving a very intricate spell around the waystones that somehow tapped into its energies and the energies of something beneath it. Soon a shimmering gateway glittered in the air before them. The assembled ranks of dark elf warriors eyed it uneasily. They did not quite understand what was going on here, although they could see some powerful magic being cast. Malekith turned his cold gaze upon his army. Not a single soldier present could hold his glance for more than a heartbeat, and none of them dare even attempt it. All of them were thoroughly cowed. It was possible for one being such as himself to intimidate tens of thousands. All it took was courage and iron will. He raised his hand and gave the signal that the great phase of his great plan was about to begin. His generals gave orders to the officers. His officers gave orders to their warriors. One by one, a unit at a time, the soldiers advanced into the gateway the demon had opened and disappeared. Malekith turned his glance upon Ankari. Now, the Great War had truly begun. A delicious aroma of fear arose from the assembled soldiery and their leaders. None of them wished to invite or even give an excuse for punitive action. There were many ways that could be turned to amusing advantage, Ankari thought, if he wished. At the moment, he did not really want to. Malekith had calculated things very finely. Ankari did not want to interfere with his plans to ravage Ulthuan. He wanted very badly to see that happen, and he had made up his mind to do everything in his power to help in this one area. He wanted to kill High Elves, and the best way of doing that was to see that their savage kindred were in position to do as much damage as possible. That was why he had spent the past few days in the ultimately tedious business shipping the Witch King's troops to various points around Ulthuan. He paused for a moment, wondering where this sudden complacency had come from. He examined the nature of the spells binding him for what felt like the millionth time. There was indeed an element of subtle compulsion woven into them, guiding his thoughts into these paths. That increased his anger, but even that was channeled. He laughed and allowed himself to enjoy the mind-altering sensation. All that was happening here was that a certain aspect of his mood and personality were being amplified. It was strangely enjoyable, a thing which was also a component of the spell. In his deepest, secret heart, Nkari understood the insult and resented it. One locked-off chamber of his mind plotted vengeance and began to muster its resources. Other chambers of his mind entered into the spirit of things and plotted how he could aid in this new rape of Ulthuan. A few days passed, and Nkari enjoyed a delicious aroma of fear that rose from the assembled soldiery and their leaders. Nkari continued largely just to shuttle the Witch King's troops around the Isle of Ulthuan, and on one of his trips he set foot in Avalon, which he had rampaged through all those millennia ago. Nearby he could tell that there were two descendants of Anarion. Their psychic stench was quite unmistakable. One of them was the warrior Tyrion. Just the faintest hint of that spiritual aroma was enough to get Nkari's hands to flex like claws and salivate at the thought of tearing up that particular prey. But Malekith was summoning him back, and he had no choice but to obey. Over the course of Malekith's campaign, victory after victory came. With the element of surprise Nkari's portals provided, it seemed the Druki forces were unstoppable. There was, however, a thorn in the Witch King's side. He had originally planned to conquer a new Everqueen, but after several attempts, his patience was running thin, and he turned to the greater demon for aid. The Everqueen was still alive and free. She had been saved by the elf called Tyrion. It was a name that Nkari was familiar with. It was a name that most elves of Nagaroth were familiar with. A rage burned within the demon's breast. "Tyrion," Nkari said. The venom in his voice could have poisoned an army. Malekith knew at that moment he and the demon were of one accord. "You think you could kill him?" Malekith asked. "You jest. The last time I encountered him, only the god Asurion saved him. He has grown more skilled since then," Malekith informed him. "No amount of skill can save him from my wrath." The demon knew that Malekith would be taking a risk if he allowed the demon to pursue Tyrion, as the demon was the only one capable of conjuring the portals. But the campaign was going well, and Malekith had confidence in the demon's abilities. "Go, Nkari. Use all your power. Slay Tyrion and return here with the head of the Everqueen as soon as possible. I will place it on my standard and use it for my war banner. It will be my very great pleasure," said Nkari. For once the demon sounded entirely sincere. His shape altered and twisted, becoming once again the monstrous four-armed being that Malekith had first bound into his service. It let out a roar of rage and pleasure and snapped one massive claw together. "I will take the head of the Everqueen with my own claw." It turned and lopped from the Witch King's presence without another word. A gate opened in front of Nkari, and he vanished into it. Back to the lands of Avalon. Nkari, following a scent and a feeling, came across her tournament grounds. Head down, tracking by scent like a hound. It felt good to be wearing something like its normal battle form again, after weeks bound in the form of an elf maid. The chains were still there, still binding it, but at least it was enjoying some variety. It chafed its protean nature to be confined to one shape for so long. Of course, it was not as powerful as it should be. The chains bound it to this world, but they inhibited its ability to draw on its full powers. It was far stronger still, though, than anything it was likely to meet in this pitiful plane, but it only had a fraction of the strength it normally possessed, even here. It sniffed again. The trail was an easy one to follow. It knew the accursed scent it was following only too well. It was Tyrion, and judging by the faint taint of corruption in it, he had been wounded and poisoned. Good. He deserved it. Of course, it would be a pity if he died before Nkari could reach him and enact his vengeance. There was another descent of Anarion with him, a female one, touched by a being not unlike the god Asurion. This would be the Everqueen. Nkari had to give Malekith credit for something. This was a task it was truly going to enjoy. It did not mind being bound to complete it in the slightest. The only thing that troubled it was the compulsion to complete the task and return as quickly as possible. This was something he wanted to savor, to derive the maximum possible pleasure from. Well, no doubt, it would find a way to do it, and still stay within the letter of the command that Malekith had laid down. For a moment, it was enjoying being free to hunt and prowl. It made a pleasant change from being a mere ferryman for the Druki armies. That thought sent a ripple of fury through N'Kari. At some point, it would find a way to take its vengeance on the Witch King too. With that thought, it bowed down over the trail once more, and scuttling along on multiple limbs, began to follow a trail that might have baffled the most sensitive of bloodhounds. The continued corrupting presence of N'Kari in the sacred forests of Avalorn rippled through the world roots to Athel Loren. Ariel, Queen of the Forest, had no wish to be involved in the squabbles of their cousins, but the forest had not forgotten what N'Kari had done to Avalorn, and would not allow him to roam the sacred grove unchecked. As such, Ariel dispatched Skarlock and a kinband of his scouts to put an end to the demon's presence in the sacred groves. N'Kari, oblivious, continued his hunt, and soon came across the bodies of one of the parties that Malekith had sent after the Everqueen. The corpses were old, and they had been left to lie. A few had been bitten and chewed on by massive jaws, and N'Kari guessed belonged to cold ones. The scent of Tyrion led to this place. It had taken the demon a little time to pick it up when it had crossed the river, but N'Kari was using magic as much as its nostrils, and it had found the scent again, though a hound might not have. It was obvious that Tyrion had passed this way, and had been joined again by the Everqueen nearby. He was curious, though, about what had happened here. It was curious whether the one it hated was even still alive. Fortunately, it knew a way to find out. It extended a claw and inscribed the sign of Slaanesh in the mud around one of the corpses. It spoke the words of an ancient ritual, and felt power flow from it into the body. A sigh emerged, not from the mouth, but from the gap in the cadaver's chest, as the lungs wheezed rotten air. The corpse sat upright, and its head swiveled until it looked at N'Kari with empty eye sockets. "What do you want with me? Why have you disturbed my soul's dissolution into the realm beyond? I would ask you 3 questions aloud by spell and ritual. Ask away, then, and let me fly back to hell. It is too cold for me here now. Who killed you?" "An elf with a flaming sword. He stepped out in the night and slaughtered us as if we were children." "Why?" "Because we were enemies. Why else? Is his soul with yours in hell now?" "Not to my knowledge, and I would know, for he was my killer." "Then go. You are dismissed." I go. The corpse slumped, and the witch-fires died in its eyes. N'Kari laughed, long and loud. Its prey was out there still. It was good to know. And now it was only a matter of finding it. Soon N'Kari summoned lesser demons to his side to aid in his cause, and deal with any roving warbands at this time of conflict. They helped, as soon he found himself and his band of demons under near constant attack. Skarlock and his scout thwarted the Keeper of Secrets as it hunted. They did not seek to engage the beast directly, but paralleled its path through the forest. Time and again, Skarlock and his comrades ambushed the demonettes and fiends of N'Kari, used as trackers, felling them with arrows or luring them onto false trails. This was deadly work, for the demons were many, and Skarlock and his comrades few. Worse, the woods of Avalorn were thick with dark elves, and many times Skarlock was forced to break from his mission to evade or eliminate Nagarothi patrols. Despite these diversions, N'Kari soon came across the bodies of Khainite assassins Malekith had sent after the Everqueen. N'Kari loomed over the dead bodies of the Witch King's chosen assassins. The stink of magic hung over the battlefield. It had been unleashed here, and quite strongly by the standards of mortals. It was enough for N'Kari to recreate what had happened. Tyrion had been more than a match for Malekith's pet killers. The boy had improved over the last century. His wound had become worse, though. He smelled as if he was rotting away inside. Fortunately, he was close now. It would not take long to overhaul him and the Everqueen. Tireless as ever, Ankari put its head down and followed the trail. It moved with the speed of the storm wind. Lust for revenge made its bounding strides all the faster, seemingly dismissing his lesser demons, perhaps to move faster and stealthier at this point. Ankari came face to face with his wood elf harassers only once, and then briefly. The scouts revealed themselves and stung him to wrath with a swift volley. They lured Ankari onto a band of dark elves who, panicked by the greater demon's onset, loosed a flurry of crossbow bolts and thus earned the Keeper of Secrets full measure of retribution. As Ankari tore through the Nagarothri ranks, Wood Elves and the Everqueen both temporarily forgotten, Scarlock and his band slipped away through the world routes. The last deadly chase had cost him many of his fellows, and he judged that Alarielle must now attend to her own fate. Ankari resumed his search, but something momentarily drew his attention, and Ankari laughed aloud. It sensed the presence of the wizard who had banished it over a century before. Of course, he would be looking for his brother. Briefly, Ankari considered turning aside and swatting the troublesome mage, but it found the compulsion laid on it by the Witch King was strong. Not that it mattered. It was close to Tyrion now. All it had to do was wait for a few moments, and Teclis would come upon his dead twin. Then Ankari would take his vengeance on the mage. As Ankari drew ever closer, he could sense the presence of the blood of Anarion more strongly. One of the scents belongs to Tyrion, the warrior who had done so much to help defeat it over a century ago. The other scent belonged to a female. It was a subtle scent, and there was a suggestion of great power to it. Somewhere, deeply hidden, nearby there was a deity. It was not quite as warlike or as potent as Asuryan, but it was, or it could be, very powerful. This made Ankari wary. It moved carefully closer, adjusting its shape to keep it camouflaged amongst the dense undergrowth. It padded softly, closer, sniffing the air and readying itself for anything. Tyrion's scent was ever more sickly and tainted. The warrior was very ill. Of course, it did not matter very much, for his life was about to come to an end. Ankari was pleased by the fact that it was not only going to be able to carry out its orders for Malekith, but take revenge on one of its greatest enemies in this world at the same time. It could sense the presence of Teclis close behind it, but somewhat muffled, as if by powerful deceptive magic. It seemed that fate, or the dark gods, had conspired to give it the perfect opportunity for vengeance. It was close enough now to peer out from the bushes and see the pair as they sat by a fire. They looked comfortable, which was also a good thing. It would take great pleasure in tormenting them. These things always went better if the victims felt secure to begin with. It listened to the conversation the two were having for a while. It was the usual mortal trivia, nothing very interesting to one of its age and predisposition. It knew it could waste a great deal of time waiting for them to say something that piqued its interest. Instead, it moved further away into the undergrowth and changed its shape again and went crashing through the bushes as loudly as it could, determined to get their attention and unsettle them before it finally took its vengeance. It wanted to draw this moment out, to savor it, to feel the fear building in the minds of its prey. It laughed softly to itself. It had waited for this for a very long time. What was that? Alarielle asked. Tyrion forced himself upright, his head spun, dizziness threatening to overwhelm him. He felt sick as he had never felt in his life, and he felt something else, something that was in its own way as bad as the sickness. He sensed the presence of something evil, a faint, sickly sweet aroma that reminded him of a perfume. It also brought to mind something else that he had scented a long time ago. I don't know, but I don't like it one little bit, he said, forcing himself to his feet as he stood there swaying. A worried expression fluttered over Lariel's face. Tyrion knew he was the cause of it, not whatever she had heard out there in the darkness. That was wrong. There was something that needed to be afraid of out there. It worried him that she had sensed that before he did. It was you who brought me this far, Tyrion said. I would not be here now if it was not for you. We did this together, and we will finish this together." She leaned forwards and touched his hand. Her touch felt very cold, but that was perhaps only because he felt as though he was burning up. She leaned closer to him until their faces were almost touching. Her lips were slightly parted, and Kari found their lust for one another almost palpable. "That you most assuredly will do," said Nkari's voice from the darkness. "I will see to it." Emerging from the forest was Nkari's massive four-armed figure. One of those arms ended in a monstrous claw. "Nkari," Tyrion said, forcing himself to hold his blade level, even though he was so weak he could barely stand. "I am glad you remember me," said the demon, beckoning in an awful parody of an exotic dancer trying to entice one of her audience. "I certainly remember you, blood of an Aryan." Without taking his eyes off the demon, Tyrion shouted, "Run!" "Please do," said Nkari. "I will enjoy it all the more. Once I have killed this one, it will give me great pleasure to hunt you down. I would be very grateful for you if you could prolong this for as long as possible." Tyrion's blade's flames burned brighter, as if somehow it recognized Nkari and what it stood for. "You're somewhat better armed than the last time I met you," Nkari said. "That should make this slightly more enjoyable as well." "I see you are wearing chains," Tyrion said. "You were your own master the last time we met. Now it seems you're someone's slave. I will have my revenge on the one who has bound me, just as I will have my revenge upon you. My vengeance will be as terrible as it is inevitable." "What is it like being a servant? I have heard the followers of Slaanesh enjoy submission. How do you find it? If you're trying to convince me into initiating you into its pleasures, it will not work. I simply do not have the time. I must kill you, I must kill her, and then I must return to plotting my revenge." "It seems to me you spend more time talking about revenge than taking it. And it seems to me you're very keen to meet your death. Do you really suffer so much? Does your wound pain you so?" "Run," Tyrion again said to Elariel. "I will hold it for as long as I can." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I would not give this the pleasure of seeing me run, nor will I leave you." "How touching," Nkari said. "Don't you realize that your lover wishes to die? He cannot live with that wound, and he wishes to leave this world heroically. I'm almost tempted to let him live and watch him die in slow agony. It has certain advantages. He can witness what I do to you before he goes. Do not be afraid. There will be as much pleasure as there is pain in it for you, and you will come to enjoy both before the end." Tyrion sprang forwards, the blade Sungthang flashing in a blazing arc. He put all his remaining strength and speed into the blow, and Kari evaded it easily, and laughed. "It seems I have touched a nerve." Elariel spread her hands and spoke a word. A wave of greenish energy flowed towards the demon, and Kari's hand made the gestures of the counterspell and neutralized it. "Pitiful. An apprentice could do better." Tyrion moved in close and struck again while the demon was distracted. Sungthang bit into its flesh, and there was a sound of sizzling as the skin burned away. A faint, sweet aroma filled the air. The demon lashed out with its fist and batted Tyrion away like an elf tossing a small animal across the room. Tyrion fell badly. Blackness swept over him as he tried to force himself to rise, but could not. he knew his end had come. Ankari was now advancing upon Alarielle with something more than merely killing her on its mind, for her soul would make the sweetest of meats. Ankari had almost reached Alarielle. It had stretched out its huge arm like a lover, and was herding her towards a great tree. Tyrion lay on the ground and did not move. From behind him, Ankari heard a word of power as a bolt of energy hurtled towards the demon. Ankari screeched. For a moment it seemed to be outlined in fire and lightning. It turned to face Teclis and roared. "It seems I have your attention," Teclis said. "Depart now, and I will spare you." "Little Teclis, my, how you have grown," said the demon. "I see you have not lost your taste for melodramatic dialogue," replied Teclis. "It seems your skill at magic has greatly improved," said the greater demon as it moved closer to Teclis. Its movements was reminiscent of the stalking step of a great predator. Teclis worked the spell of opening, using his powers to undo the intricate magical locking mechanisms on the chains of binding. They fell away to the ground. Ankari, surprised by this course of action, spread its claws wide and laughed. It seemed to expand with a new influx of power and evil. "You have made a mistake, little Teclis," Ankari chortled as his power continued to grow. Teclis spoke words of banishment as Ankari's outline wavered. Without the chains to anchor him, he was prey to instability once more. Teclis manipulated the flows of magic around him, adding to the resistance of normal reality, aiding in the mage's attempts to expel Ankari back to its natural home. "No!" cried Ankari, realizing what was happening. It strode towards Tyrion, determined to take revenge on one of the brothers at least. Teclis invoked another offensive spell. An enormous blast of magical energy ravened through his body and washed over the demon, lining it with witchfire. Ankari faded away, still screaming. And so, Ankari was banished from the mortal realms once more. With the banishment of the greater demon, Malekith's armies were crippled, and left the four descendants of Anarion to face off at the Battle of Finuvial Plain. During the battle, Malekith dueled magically with Teclis, and in a bid to escape burning flames, sent himself into the realms of chaos. Although little is known about Malekith's time in the realm of chaos, it is known that while there, he was hunted by Ankari, who as ever was seeking revenge for his enslavement, as well as the mere fact that he was a son of Anarion. The two clashed beneath the walls of the Marcher fortress in the realms of chaos. There Ankari had been at the peak of his power, whilst the Witch King was near death. It is not known how Malekith escaped, but escape he did, only for the two to clash again over a century later in the year 2452. On the evening that would become known as the Night of Pleasure and Pain, the Dark Elves celebrated the rite of Aphrodite, their goddess of pleasure, in enthusiastic, orgiastic style, to such a degree that it thinned the veil to the realm of chaos. Ankari, sensing his opportunity, burst forth into the city of Nagorond. He sought to claim Malekith's corrupt soul. A horde of Slaaneshi demons followed in his wake, as the screams and moans of pleasure turned to horror and pain. The city guard soon marched out to protect its population, and a battle commenced. The demons began to tumble to the cobblestones, ichor gushing from spear and bolt wounds. Only where Ankari strutted did Dark Elves know defeat. The Dark Elves began to retreat to more favorable ground as the demon horde seemed endless. Demonettes, sensing victory, let loose a shriek of joy, dashing forward, only to be cut down by the Dark Elf war machines. Ankari hung back, but two other Keeper of Secrets now joined the battle, scattering the Dark Elves like broken dolls, forcing Malekith himself to join the fray. Not breaking stride, The Witch King, with a flinch of his fingers, covered a group of demonettes in black flame, the air now filled with the ruinous stench of charred demon flesh. Malekith raised a hand and pointed at one of the Keeper of Secrets. Clenching his fist, the beast bellowed in agony as every bone in its unholy body snapped at once. Having broken the momentum of the attack, Nagaron the Blackguard began to push the demons back and trapped the second Keeper of Secrets against the statue of Cain and hacked it apart. Now, nothing stood in the way of these two enemies as they came face to face on the battlefield. Nkari bellowed and charged directly at the Witch King, for Nkari didn't care how the battle went. He was here for his prize. The Blackguard moved to block Nkari, but he is the mightiest of his kind and would not abide an obstacle. The Blackguard were swept aside, trampled to bloody ruin beneath the demon's hooves, or pulverized by the impact of its monstrous fists. With a triumphant howl, Nkari confronted Malekith on the steps of the Black Tower. As Nkari approached, the Witch King started laughing, overconfident as ever. Nkari lowered his head and charged, seeking to impale Malekith on his horn. In response, Malekith sent out a stream of black fire to stagger and blind the greater demon, dodging to one side and unleashing a savage backswing, which cut deep into the demon's flesh. Nkari bellowed in pain and turned to face his prey, claws slashing out. Malekith retreated across the steps, the destroyer, Malekith's blade, flashing as it parried each strike. Again and again, the Dark Elf sent black flames against Nkari, but the demon was ready for them now, and the fire sputtered out due to his magical defenses. Nkari lashed out, and Malekith ducked the demon, whose blow destroyed the stonework behind the elf, sending rubble flying in all directions. Taking advantage of Nkari's momentary confusion, the Witch King hefted the destroyer's black blade and pressed the attack with a flurry of knife-quick blows. With each strike, the destroyer glowed dully as it sapped the demon's magical lifeblood. With one last effort, the greater demon rose to his feet. His lower arms whipped out once more, and this time Malekith was too slow. Nkari's vice-like hand clamped around the Witch King's shoulders, pinning his arms and the destroyer to his sides. Nkari leered with sadistic joy as he heaved the struggling Witch King from the ground. His serpent tongue flicked out to caress his captive's armored cheek, leaving a trail of foul-scented drool in its wake. When a handful of Blackguard charged up the steps to their master's aid, Nkari gestured lazily with a claw and sent a cloud of magical shards to tear the flesh from their bones. As their lifeless bodies crumpled, the greater demon brought his other claw up and clamped it around Malekith's armored throat. With a last, lingering smile, Nkari began to squeeze. But the Witch King was not yet done. For the last few moments that his Blackguard had bought him, he had marshaled his sorcery, and now he unleashed it in a single display of devastating power. A bolt of black lightning arced from the sky and smashed into the greater demon, shattering his defenses and wreaking ruin upon his flesh. As Nkari staggered with the impact, Malekith burst free from his grasp. Before the demon could recover, he brought the destroyer around in a mighty two-handed blow that severed Nkari's foul head. Thus did Malekith deliver Nagaron. Though the demonettes would have surely fought on, Nkari's death upset the balance of magics that allowed their reinforcements to reach the mortal world. Seeing their foes' numbers slacken, the Dark Elves found fresh strength. Shouting praises to Cain and to Malekith, they swept through the bloody streets and did not rest their blades until all the demonettes were slain. At the battle's end, Malekith stood before the Black Tower and proclaimed that in a victorious celebration, the rites of Aphrodite would continue for another day and night. The Witch King then strode to the temple and gave Nkari's headless corpse as offering. He could think of no greater tribute to the goddess of delight than the body of a vanquished pleasure demon. And that brings us up to date, ladies and gentlemen, with the story of Ankari in the Total War Warhammer timeline. Singly driven by revenge upon wrongs done millennia ago, he finds himself failing over and over again, although I'm sure he does have his successes, just we hear about his failures a lot more often. We also have a little bit of knowledge about a weapon that was once wielded by Ankari, and looks like it's going to be wielded by the greater demon in Total War Warhammer 3, and that is Witstealer, a blade that was said to be forged in the molten heat of desire and quenched in Slaanesh's own blood. It was awarded to Ankari to help him defeat Skarbrand, but desire has never burned so hot as wrath, and Ankari saw swift defeat. It's thought that the blade was lost to the greater demon at this point, but it seems he managed to track it down and get it back. It was featured in Total War Warhammer 2 as a weapon for the Wood Elves, I believe. It could turn up in a random occurrence, but it seems as though the greater demon has his sword back now, and will be taking it into the realms of Total War Warhammer 3. In the next section, I usually go over models, rules in terms of how they used to play on the tabletop, but oddly enough, for a character with so much lore, Ankari never had a model, never had rules on the tabletop. People made conversions of their own, did their own thing, but there was never an official release, I don't believe. So we don't really have much to talk about as far as any of that goes. All in all, let me know how you guys found the tale of Ankari, the Arch-Temptor. Have you been tempted to take up his cause in Total War Warhammer 3? If so, let me know down in the comments below. So that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Do check out my videos on the other greater demons popping up just now, ladies and gentlemen. And I hope to catch you all on the next one. Alright guys, bye.